what are the themes behind these shows? And just like all of the major shows, Rodgers and Hammerstein tackled big issues and big themes with The King and I: colonialism, imperialism, women's rights, slavery, the conflicts between traditional cultures, and the forces of change and modernity. And this is typical. It's part of this revolution of the Golden Age. It's typical of Golden Age musicals to take on big themes, to tackle them, even the musical comedies. And when you consider the demographics of the creators of the Broadway musical, the inventors of the Broadway musical, the immigrants who are largely, almost entirely, and I did a study of this, it's fair to say that 99% of the creators of Broadway musicals come from these categories: immigrants, Jews, queers, and African Americans. Those are the inventors of the Broadway musical, overwhelmingly. So it should be no surprise that the three main themes, the principal topics that these outcast inventors choose to dramatize most frequently, are equity. Number one, equity, social justice, and inclusion. Number two, transgressive women. And by that, I mean women who refuse to do what society tells them to do, either in the period of the story that they're in, or even in the period in which the musical is written. And number three, the vital importance of forming and maintaining healthy communities. So equity, social justice, and inclusion, transgressive women, and community are the three overwhelming principal themes of the Broadway musical. Nearly every musical, both classic and that continues into the modern era, is centered around one of these three themes, and many shows tackle two, or like King and I, all three of them. From the very beginning, musicals reflect America. They are like Shakespeare said, we hold the mirror up to life, and musicals hold the mirror up to life in America. So, and from the very beginning, issues involving equity, diversity, social justice, and inclusion have been at the center of America's story, and America's many attempts and recurring failures to fully achieve its founding, staggering principal idea, which is that all people are created equal. And musicals have, and certainly Hammerstein musicals, have been have embraced that challenge to tell that story, to dramatize that story. And it's interesting because you talk to people, I often have this conversation with people, and they're very surprised to hear me say what the three main principal themes of the musical are, because people don't think of musicals that way. But, I can name at least 32 hit Broadway musicals that explicitly have just the themes of equity, diversity, and inclusion at the center of them. And so it's indisputable that that's what the musicals are about. But I think they're also, what's so subversive about them is that they don't put that on the surface, that most of that, the message is clearly there, that idea is clearly there, but it's encapsulated in this wildly entertaining form that is that is not hitting us over the head or trying to preach to us in a way. It's much more subversive than that. These issues were very personal for Hammerstein, and he had strong feelings about justice in America and the world, and supported and worked for a number of anti-fascist groups and anti-racist groups. He was very involved in this world, but especially was concerned with racial injustice because it affected his own family. His sister-in-law was married to a Japanese man who had been placed in an internment camp during the war. And then after his release from the internment camp, could not find a job because he was Japanese in post-war period. And until Hammerstein's wife hired him to manage the business side of her interior design firm, which he did very, very successfully. And of course, as you probably talked about, internalized racism is the central conflict of both of the central plot lines of South Pacific. And Rodgers and Hammerstein dramatized that so successfully and effectively and brilliantly that, you know, they received the Pulitzer Prize for drama for that. So sort of coming off of that in 1951, they again tackle these big themes, which, you know, one I'll add to that is dictatorship versus democracy and universal human rights as being two of the things they add to the package here with this. I want to explore exactly how those play out in the story. I find one of the most subversive elements of this story to be the central relationship between Anna and the king. And there's a very clearly a strong connection between them, and even an evident sexual attraction. It's that electric moment when he puts his hand on her, when he says, "No, that's not how they danced," and they take arms in the waltz position, is electrifying. So however, it's very clear that in that time and that place, it is impossible for them to fall in love from either of their points of view, from the points of view of both Western and Thai society. There can never be a romantic or sexual relationship between them. It's forbidden, no matter how connected and engaged they are on an intellectual and emotional level. And this, at least subliminally, makes us ask, why? Why can't they be together? As audience members, we absolutely want them to get together. And I actually think when we watch the show, because that's what I love about live theater, but I would say even in the movie, we get some of this, our minds and our bodies are emotionally and even physically engaged in willing this to happen. We want them to get together. Come on, come on, come on. And the tension during Shall We Dance is palpable, which is part of what makes it so amazing. This, of course, makes us question the rules and traditions of not just the time period they live in, but also our own time period. We still have similar we understand that we're not so far away from that, from those taboos, from those ideas that people can't be together and shouldn't be together. On a similar track, the king has a lot in common with Tevye. I find those two characters very, very parallel. He, too, is faced with the obligation of maintaining the cultural norms and traditions of his society, including upholding the patriarchy. That's his job. His job is to keep things going the way they are and not lose control of the traditions and the rules of his society. But at the same time, again, like Tevye, he has to somehow still keep up with the rapidly changing modern world. And that creates an incredibly empathetic character, and Rodgers and Hammerstein create a great deal of empathy for the dilemma that he is in. Even when we disapprove of his actions, even when we don't think, when he does things we really are not on board with, we understand why he's doing it and and we actually feel for his pain. And again, same thing with Tevye. When he denies his third daughter, we really don't like it, but we understand it because we understand what he thinks is important, what he feels is important. The King and I has been criticized heavily because it can be seen as representing or presenting Western culture as being superior and more evolved than Eastern culture. And the optics of that, I understand completely. However, if we take a closer look, we'll see that Hammerstein is actually pitting what have been traditionally seen as feminine, democratic, humanistic values against masculine, dictatorial, authoritarian values. Again, I'm talking from a sort of iconic way. What do we think of? How are these values viewed traditionally in society? The negative aspects of the king don't represent Asian culture so much as they represent a male-centered patriarchal power imbalance. And although the authors present the king as being incredibly smart, resourceful, charismatic, and dynamic, we also see that he shares, and they show us that he shares some of the same inhuman values, which at that exact same moment in history that the story is taking place, America is fighting the Civil War about. It's no coincidence that the discussion of the Civil War is part of the plot of The King and I. The barbarians in the story are the men who believe in slavery, both in America and in Thailand. The second couple's subplot, which this is Tup Tim and Lun Tao, they have a very serious subplot. This is one of the changes that Rodgers Hammerstein start with South Pacific, is the second couple, instead of being the comic dancing couple, becomes the tragic couple in their shows from then on, basically. And of course, that plot concerns Tup Tim, who's a slave sent by the king of Burma as a gift to the king of Siam. And she's supposed to become another of his many concubines, but she's in love with Lun Tao, a scholar who's been sent to the court of Siam at the same time. And Tup Tim becomes one of Mrs. Anna's best students. And Anna encourages her to read Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a worldwide sensation at that time, and indeed is even mentioned in the memoirs, and is encouraged to write a play based on it to present before the king when the British envoy comes for a state visit. This, of course, is brilliantly and vividly dramatized in Jerome Robbins' staggering ballet, Small House of Uncle Thomas. And it underlines for me what I believe is the principal theme of The King and I, which is anti-slavery, the fundamental right for freedom for all people. That's what The King and I is focused on and is about. And which is why the Small House of Uncle Thomas is basically the 11 o'clock spot of the show, or is the climax of the show in many ways. You could say there's a couple 11 o'clock spots, but it is center, and nothing in the show it takes up as much stage time as the Small House. It's like 15 minutes of the show is spent on this ballet, which from the beginning was Hammerstein's idea that there would be this ballet of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And that's on purpose because he wants to demonstrate this idea that slavery in any culture, in any world, is the negative idea, and the expanded idea of slavery, and its reverse, freedom, is the most important thing. The musical ends with a complex mixture of sadness for the death of the king, who both Anna and we in the audience have developed great affection for, in spite of his many flaws. And in addition, we also feel great hope for the future of Siam under the new king, who we see starts to bring freedom and democratic values to his people. Anna has literally been the new king's teacher, at least in this semi-fictional version of the story of the musical. And she's helped to bring this change about. But I think it's not because she represents a superior Western culture, but rather because she's a woman, and women represent freedom and democracy. The musical is Hammerstein is advocating for democracy and freedom for all people, as represented by Mrs. Anna and Prince Chulalongkorn, and as opposed to the totalitarian idea that the king represents, this idea of a kind of society that is not entirely free and not at all free for many people. With all of that I just said, the optics of the musical can make us very uncomfortable today, and is the nature of the criticism. Democracy is embodied by a white woman, and authoritarianism is represented by an Asian man. And even though I don't think that was in all an intent of the creators of the show, it might be a fatal flaw in the show in the modern world because it obscures what the show is really about. We see that, and many people will have that reaction. You're saying white Western culture is superior to Asian culture. I know that was not Hammerstein's intention, especially based on who he was, but it is something that is in our face today and hard to deal with.
So I'm going to use Maven privilege and give the first question, and it's about both South Pacific and the King and I. It's something I've been thinking about lately. It's common to make the point that all the important creators of musical theater, except for Cole Porter, were Jews, and listed in that list is often Oscar Hammerstein. Yet under no definition was he Jewish. He didn't consider himself Jewish. Jews didn't consider himself Jewish. His mother wasn't Jewish. He just had some Jewish, if you could say blood, whatever it would be, but under no definition would he consider himself Jewish. So I'm thinking that these symbols of crossing taboo boundaries in both South Pacific and the King and I are him working out his parents' relationship. Is that possible?
Absolutely, it could be. Yeah, I haven't actually thought that much about that aspect of it, but from the autobiographical standpoint, but certainly every writer brings their personal experience to it. So that's an interesting thing to look at. I would just counter certainly his grandfather was very Jewish.
And here's an equally good lecture on Hello, Dolly.